So we got one more presentation this morning, and after that, I got a little video animation, kind of a good thing to end with, I think, which is Dan Pink's Drive. We're going to start this morning with Peopleware, and this is one of the books that's on your syllabus. And the reason, I'll show you what it looks like for those of you. I think some of you have bought it before. This is the book by Tom DeMarco and Timothy Lister. And this book is pretty interesting. And the reason I say it's near and dear to my heart is I mentioned before, there's a gentleman named Jim Barrows who I worked with some years ago when I was a software development manager. And he reported to me, and he was a great guy. One of the best developers I've come across, and I've come across some good ones. He was the one who introduced me to BDD. So without that, without Jim, it might have been years before I found it again and everything. So I owe a lot to him. But I remember one time he told me, Larry, you're a great guy, but you're not a really good software development manager. You need to read this book. And this was perhaps, I think, if I'm looking back, probably the book that set me off. I was already an agile coach / scrum master by this time. So I had drank some of the Kool-Aid, so to speak. But I had not yet, looked at the world in a way that was different as much as I wanted to. Right. So you can take your 2-day CSM and things and not necessarily change the way you view the world a lot. I know this because I work with a lot of CSMs, and they're awesome people, and they have a little bit of agile and scrum knowledge, but have they really shifted their worldview? So this is the one that really kind of struck me. It really just knocked me off of my support, my foundation, and challenged me to think differently. Because it presented a world to me that I didn't necessarily recognize. Remember, we were talking about yesterday, we kind of see what we want to see, right? We see what we've been trained to see. We see the simple world and the complicated world. We don't always see the complex world because a lot of times we might kind of think it exists or have an inkling or a feeling that there's something different out there, but we don't really know what it is. So I read this book and I was completely blown away, because it was the first time I was hearing some of this stuff. Now, reason it was the first time I was hearing some of this stuff is this book was actually written, I think, first published in it was either 84 or 88. I can't remember. It was either when I graduated from high school or college. I think it was 84. And the reason I mention the dates of these things is if you look at everything that we've read in this class, it didn't come out last year, right? This whole concept of digital transformation and complexity and change and blah, blah, blah. It wasn't invented by the millennials. Some of them think they have. But it existed, some time ago. And some of the things that we've known, we as humans have known for some time. The most interesting thing to me is I keep reading these old books that tell me that, all these things that we now can recognize as the complex world of knowledge work. What surprises me is that these things have been around for so long, but we continue as human beings, and especially leadership or management, which I use as a pejorative term. We act as if we've never read these books. We act as if we've never seen these books. We act as if this world just doesn't exist. And it just surprises the heck out of me. Why? That's why I went down the rabbit hole. So this was the book that sent me down the rabbit hole. And without this book, whether or not we'd be sitting here now and whether or not we got to sleep in this morning, if I hadn't read it, we'd probably be sleeping still, some of us, right? So the reason they call it Peopleware is because if we're talking about technology in general, it consists generally of hardware and software. We all know that distinction. But it also the people doing the work. So there's the kind of the technology, and then there's the people, and the technology is bounded. So I won't say it's simpler, but working with people is generally tougher, and that's kind of the theme of the book. Anyways, here's the year 1987. So I was still in college when this came out. In fact, I was enjoying myself my year abroad in 1987. Here's the thesis of the book. And all I've done with this book, because I want it to speak for itself, is after we get through this first slide, it's just quotes from the book, verbatim. And then I'm just going to, give you some thoughts on them. But the major problems of systems work are not so much technological as sociological. The problems that we have in books, in what we do, are not technical problems. Those are the easy ones to solve. I think Senge talks about it too, and a little bit in this talk. These are the easy ones. What's the hard ones? People, systems, how people interact, et cetera, et cetera. This book is broken down into 6 parts. I'm going to break this presentation down into 6 parts, and it's just a bunch of quotes. That's all, nothing more. First part is managing the human resource. And they talk about that. There's a couple of things that are scientific in nature. They've done some polling, they've done some studies, they've done some contests, if you will, or experiments. One of the surveys they did, they asked development project managers, and they asked about projects and whether they failed or succeeded. We've seen this before. They're not the only ones who did it. It wasn't a small bit of research. It was 500 real world projects. And for the overwhelming majority of the projects that didn't work out, they referred to as bankrupt projects. There was not a single technological issue to explain the failure. It wasn't technology is not the problem, which, by the way, always amazes me. Even when we hire people for technical positions, we tend to stress the technology. When we hire leaders in technology, we stress the technology. We don't really stress the leadership and or the management skills, which are much more important. As we knew this back in 1987, we probably knew it before then. Most managers are willing to concede that they've got more people problems than technical problems, right? Technical problems, we can figure it out. But they manage, they hire, right? As if technology were their main concern. And it's surprising. Why? Why do they do this? Why do we do this as human beings? Again, it comes back to this. This is I think a very human thing. If we have success in projects, it stems from the interactions and positive interactions of the people who are doing the work. This is something, though I probably at some point in time should do a small presentation on it. Some of you are familiar with Google did a project. It was called Project Aristotle. If you're not familiar with it, what they did, I could have saved them a bunch of money, by the way. So any of you working for Google or know people who work for Google, they should have hired me years ago. I could have saved them a whole bunch of money, because in Project Aristotle, what they did is Google's got a lot of data. It's a big data company. They took all the good teams, the high performing teams, and they said, what do they have in common? And that was Project Aristotle. And what they looked for was what I would call the usual suspects. What technology were the teams using? How many years of experience did the teams have? What level of education did they have? PhDs or masters? How much did they pay them? Don't these sound like the usual suspects? And as far as I'm concerned, they got a lot of money, so it doesn't matter. They wasted a year or so by their own accounts, looking for the usual suspects. If they would have read this book ahead of time, they might have started looking in a more appropriate place to start. What they did find is they found that there were 5 things that correlated with high-performing teams, which echo a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. Number one thing being, and I think you've heard this term before, psychological safety. Do people feel safe? Do they feel included? Can they say what's on their mind, and will people actually listen to them, right? And what do we call this today? We call this DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Let's get diverse viewpoints. Let's treat them equally, or not, not exactly equally, because some ideas might be better than others, but at least on the surface, let's listen to them and include people, include different ideas. and treat people fairly. This is just simple stuff we learned in kindergarten, I think. I hope, right? So it's good human interaction. Now, there's 4 other things that they found, and I'm not going to go into all of them. You can look it up. Just Google Project Aristotle. The other big one being, once you have the psychological safety, you also have to know what your boundaries are. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but if I'm going to be empowered, can I, make a decision that affects the entire company? Can I spend $1 million, or do I have some kind of limits on what I can do within an organization? And you should have limits within an organization, right? What are those limits? That provides safety too. What can I do? What can I not do? And there's some other things, but by far it was psychological safety. This stuff, we knew this stuff. Google should have known this stuff. I think the big problem to editorialize is that we've forgotten how to read in this country. I really do. We get so used to bite-sized entertainment and pieces, myself included, that we don't sit down with a book and we don't really reflect. So I think I know all us old people, I'm putting myself in the old category now, are always, talking about how the world is going to hell in a handbag or a handbasket or whatever the phrase is, right? Maybe it's true this time, maybe not, I don't know. But if they sat down and read some books, they wouldn't have had this problem. See, that's how I could have saved them some money, because I come from a generation that actually sat down and read books. These days, I think the last poll I saw was only 1 in 3 Americans have read a single book this year. I don't know how they do it. I don't think I could survive in a world like that. I'm like that. What is it? That the one, was it? I forget what show it was, where they took the guy's books away. Remember, all he wanted to do, Burgess Meredith. All he wanted to do was read books. Twilight Zone, right? That's it. It took me a while. I'm getting old. I told you that. Twilight Zone. All he wants to do is read books, right? It comes to the end of the world. He's the only man left. He wants to read books. He wears glasses. His glasses broke. He can't read books. Oh, what a show that was, by the way. That's another thing us folks do, is we get around and talk about the old days and how much better our television was. But that was a very smart show. Why do we focus on these technical things? Why? Because it's easier. We focus on the things because they're easier, not because they're necessarily better. We do the same thing when we talk about metrics. Sometimes when people use that word metrics, it sounds like fingernails on a chalkboard to me. But we do the same thing with what we measure. We measure what's easy. We don't measure what's important to measure. You're much better measuring one thing that's important than 100 things that don't really matter, just because we can. We're like the drunk guy. You all know the story about the drunk guy under the street light looking for his car keys, right? And the cop comes up to him. He says, what are you doing? He says, I'm looking for my car keys. He says, well, I'll help you. Where'd you lose them? He says, well, I lost them way over there. He says, why are you looking here? He says, the light's better here, right? And that's what we do. And it's an unfortunate fact, but we focus on technology because technology is bounded. Technology itself, minus some of the people stuff, is in the complicated world. There is an answer. It's like math. I think I said this before. My son was struggling with English, right? He's a freshman in high school. He's struggling with English. Why? There's a million ways to write that paper on Fahrenheit 451, right? There's no right answer to it, right? That's a complex world. Why didn't he struggle with math? Hey, if you do the logic right, one answer, right? And that's why we do it. And that's why we concentrate on the technology when we're interviewing people, because and we hire people for technology because it's measurable. How many years did the person do this? What's their degree? Blah, blah, blah. That's measurable. How good is this person as a leader? I don't know. I can't go to the store and get me a pound of leadership, right? It's tougher. But as I tell my sons, I said, look, it's not meant to be easy. That's why in this particular class, I think you all who've made it this far realize that the investment of your time was worth it. It's not meant to be easy. It's meant to be worth it. Is it worth the effort? And I'd say yes. Because in the world of people, in the complex world, we have this huge variation. Not only variation, as we talked about on day 2, of value and effort, right? But also I would refer to it as talent. There are certain individuals in the knowledge-based world who can way outperform those in just the physical, complicated world. Think about, as I always mention, and I don't have anything against ditch diggers, but if you're digging a ditch, that's a physical act. The best ditch digger is not going to be 10 times better than the least, or 2.5 times better than the average. But what happens in the world of knowledge work, specifically in software development? We've got some studies about that. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. Development and software development is inherently different from production. However, managements of development and allied efforts, basically people who are in the complex world, allow their thinking to be shaped by a management philosophy that was derived entirely from production. We do this because it's very hard for us. We have to have mental models and metaphors, and the easiest mental models and metaphors come to us from the physical world, and sometimes we misapply those. Sometimes we have too few mental models. So we're seeing part of the picture, but we're not seeing the whole picture. And so when we're deriving from, this Tayloristic world, we do some strange things. Specifically with incentives, because knowledge workers, and we're gonna talk about see that more in Drive, and that's the other reason we have that Drive book, right? Knowledge workers are motivated differently than people who are doing physical work, but we continue to build our incentives as if the work that knowledge workers were doing is physical work, and not only does it not work, but it backfires on us. It's a Cobra effect type of thing where it doesn't really do what we expect it to do. There's nothing more discouraging to a worker that the sense that his or her motivation is inadequate and has to be supplemented by that of the boss. I think I was, as my friend Jim, who sent me off to read this book, told me, I probably wasn't the best software development manager in the world. I want to be a good one, right? But I was in that old school thinking, and after I read this book, it's like, yeah, I get this. Wait a minute, I understand this. Knowledge workers are intrinsically motivated. So when I used to meet with people, when they still gave me that thing where people kind of reported to me, which was probably pretty irresponsible of the company, but when that happened, I would always say the first day to the people that I was, leading or managing, whatever term you want to use, I would say, I cannot motivate you. That's what science tells me. I cannot motivate you. You're a knowledge worker. I can demotivate you pretty damn quick. And you need to let me know if I'm doing that. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to build the environment, right? Which we see even in the Agile Manifesto. That's why it speaks to me. We say, I'm going to build that environment that's necessary for you to be successful, right? A leader, I didn't say manager, a leader in the knowledge-based world is a gardener. You provide all the things that are necessary for that plant to grow. And if it's in it for the plant to grow, then the plant's going to grow. If the plant isn't going to grow, that's not you. If you've given all the right things, it's not on you anymore. But if you haven't and you don't understand it, it's certainly on you. There's a book that I read. I think it's one of the things I think it's called "You Can't Motivate Me" or something like that. You don't, and as we read, we'll go over Dan Pink's stuff. You'll see what and the stuff from Peopleware was way in advance of the book Drive. So this is stuff we've known for a long time. You seldom need to take draconian measures to keep your people working. Most of them love what they do, unless you're a bad manager until they run into you. It's ... Right? These people want to do it. Most of the time, a lot of times people say that, people don't quit companies, they quit managers. The reason they quit managers is not because necessarily the person, sometimes it is, but it's usually because for some reason that manager is not allowing them, or the system that the manager is in, could be, is not allowing you to do what you want to do. That's the difference between knowledge work. I don't want to dig ditches. I don't know anybody who does. There's probably some people out there who do, but most people don't want to do physical work. So we have to be rewarded. We have to trick ourselves into doing something we don't want to do. But most of us in the knowledge-based world actually want to make a difference. And we will leave companies when they don't allow us to do that, when they do not create an atmosphere that allows us to do that. The next section is on office environment. I want to reiterate that this was written. Some of you remember it. Some of you aren't even that old. 1987. So they're writing this in the mid 80s. Almost everything they say applies to today. That's the funny thing, or not funny, I suppose. Kind of sad in a way. A million ways to lose a workday. There's not a single way to get one back. And almost without exception, and whether or not this describes your workplace, because obviously things are changing now. Most of us are working from home. We got people quitting jobs if they say, you can't work from home anymore. I quit, forget about it. We're in the, maybe this is a new world. I think things will snap back, but it may take some time, but I think we'll snap back. Because we've been talking about this virtual work from home world since the mid 80s too, if you all remember. Almost without exception, the workspace given to intellect workers, that's what they call them. I call them knowledge workers, same thing, is noisy, interruptive, unprivate, and sterile. Sound like your office? Sounds like a lot of offices. Open office plan. Yeah, baby. I get to save on real estate. I'm gonna get a bonus because I'm saving on real estate next year because I'm gonna throw everybody in an open office plan. Now I get to save even more money because I just give you Zoom. That doesn't mean it works better. Some places are prettier than others, but not more functional. Some places have, there's one where I went that they have a slide. Isn't that hip? Some of them have a foosball table or a ping pong table that nobody plays because they're afraid that their manager might see them. I worked at one place, they had a foosball table. They put it behind a door, a locked door. That was helpful. Most people can't get real work done. Why do we give massages on Thursdays? Why do we give these, what I consider kind of outrageous perks for people? Because we haven't figured out how to give them the kind of workspace that they really deserve. So let's just give them something else, right? Just give the kid some candy, he'll shut up, right? That's the way I look at it. I mean, you talk to me about your foosball table, I'm going to say, well, this company's given up on trying to actually let people do what they do. Not always, but staying up late, coming in early. This is generational, by the way, because as you get older, some of you will experience this. We have a tendency to get up earlier, and when we go get the blue plate special, and then we're in bed early. It's just the way it works. So if you're an older software developer, you're going to come in really early. I've seen it many, many times. Why? Because management's not there yet. And then the young folks, what they do is they come in as late as they can get away with because they're young. You know, they're probably out late night partying, whatever young folks do. I almost remember. And then they're going to stay late. Why are they going to stay late? Because after 5, everybody's left. They can get some real work done. Doesn't that strike you as odd? That it has to be that way? This was back in, again, mid 80s. What's changed? Not much. Amazing thing is that everybody knows it. Nobody ever does anything about it. That's what they say. These are all quotes. This is them talking to us. So there was one study done that is usually cited for open office plans, by the way. And I know this is a bit outdated because we don't know what's going to happen with working now that we're almost post-pandemic. The study was done I believe it was University of Michigan, did a study on open office plans. But the problem is it wasn't a very good scientific study. I read the original study because they didn't hold the variables constant, right? If you're going to do a study, you got to try to only change one thing. And then therefore you have a good idea that this is the thing that caused whatever effect you're seeing. What they did in this University of Michigan study is they did two things. They went to an open office plan and they transitioned to Agile. But what the study concluded was the open office plan was responsible for the increase in productivity and happiness, engagement, et cetera. They didn't conclude the right thing, I think. It was Agile that was responsible for people being happier and more productive. It wasn't the open office plan, because they've done recent studies on open office plans. And what they found, and this is of course right before the pandemic, they found that open office plans actually have less communication interaction among coworkers because they're so noisy that people put on headphones and they live in their own world. The best thing, well, I'll get to it. There's some conclusions here. I'll talk a little bit more about office space in a second. They did another thing that was really interesting. From 1984 to 1986, they did something called Coding Wars, which was basically a contest where they were going to get people to participate, and they were going to see who did better at solving this problem, a software problem, a writing software problem, somewhere where I had to write some software. 92 companies participated. So it's not a small study, and they did it for over a number of years. Here's the 3 rules of thumb. When they looked at performance, right? How well did one group do versus another group? This is really important, because this is knowledge work, and we see this all over in knowledge work. The best people outperform the worst by about 10 to 1. Your best developers are 10 times better than your least, right? That's huge, because again, digging ditches, what is it going to be? If you're 50% better at digging ditches, that's probably really, really good, right? The best are 10 times better. And this is also referred to, by the way, it's seen again and again and again. Steve McConnell did a meta study where he looked at all the different studies on developer productivity that went anywhere from like 18, 5x or whatever, and found out that for the most part, the average is what they found, which is 10x. So it's sometimes called the 10x rule. That in software development, your best and most productive people are 10 times better than your least. This is knowledge. This is knowledge work, folks. This is complex world. Strange, different. Other thing they found. Okay, well, that's the best to the least. I kind of get that, but what else did they find? The average developer versus the best is 2.5 times different. Again, if you take your best ditch digger and your least effective ditch digger, you're probably looking at a 50% increase. You take your best and your median, it's probably 25%. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I mean, John Henry beat the steam train, but it doesn't happen every day. Else they wouldn't write songs about it. 2.5 times better. That's a lot. There's a quote. I don't have it in this presentation. There's a quote from Steve Jobs, who says that your best developers are 100 times better, I think is the quote. I forget what it is. And there's a gentleman who said that your best developers are infinitely better than your least, because your best developers can do something that the others can't, so you can't even measure it. And I think that's true. That's a feature of knowledge work, of complex work, versus the other thing that we usually think about work. What else did they find? The half that are better than average, the top half, are 2 to 1 better than the bottom half. Again, pretty sobering numbers. And the funny thing is, what did they conclude about this? What were their conclusions after having studied this? Well, they looked at the usual suspects, right? Remember I told you about the Google study, and they should have read this book, because they did the same thing. They said, okay, let's look at the best developers. What were the characteristics of the best developers? And they looked at the usual suspects. The software development language they wrote in, number of years of experience, salary, et cetera, right? What do these folks have in common? And none of these things really correlated, which is amazing. Once you get past 6 months of experience, So this makes sense. So I don't want to say, yeah, you're just going to, pull some guy off the street, screaming on the corner of San Francisco. You can find one on every other corner, pull him in, and he's going to, be the same. No, obviously. But once you had 6 years of experience, or 6 months of experience, not even 6 years, 6 months of experience, there was no difference. So you have to have some minimal experience, but then it didn't really matter after that in terms of your performance. What did they find, though? Well, one is they did it in pairs. So these 92 companies, I forget how many people, it was 400 people or something. It was done in pairs. You had a teammate that you're working with, which is an interesting wrinkle. And what they found is it mattered who you paired with. And what they thought is that, okay, certain people cluster in certain environments. They took it back to the office space or the environment or the culture. They said there's certain cultures where developers can flourish. This makes sense to me. I was talking about the person who said, "Yeah, I've got the perfect way to hire software developers," but he worked at Amazon. Well, they're fishing in a stocked pond, and they're probably going to get better developers no matter what they do. But the question is does it work at the DMV? And no offense to the DMV. In fact, I had a really good experience multiple times at the San Mateo DMV. So I just, anybody knows people from San Mateo DMV, let them know I said that so I can get my license quickly next time. It matters where you work, and it matters where the culture is. It matters how your office space is laid out, et cetera. So what else did they find? Those who did the best had less interruption. That was one of the big things. This is the real interesting counterintuitive thing about knowledge-based work and software development in particular, because I've spent a good portion of my life working with software developers. You need two different kinds of things because software development is very, very short-term memory intensive. If anybody's ever tried to write a program, right, you have to concentrate. But you say, Larry, concentrate is something we do on our own usually, right? Doesn't that make sense? That's something that's solitary. It's like reading a book. You don't generally read a book in a group. You told us we need to have communication and collaboration and feedback to be successful. And the answer is yes. We tend to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Dichotomous thinkers. Either one thing, something is one thing or another thing. Life's not that way. We need both things. We need time to communicate and collaborate, generally to figure out how to do the right thing and do the thing right. And then we actually need the time, mostly alone or maybe in small groups or mob programming, saying maybe even in a mob if we're all concentrating on the same thing. We need that concentration in order to be successful, right? So what they found is three things. Those who performed best had a quiet space. They had less interruption. And what was really, really intriguing to me, and this is the one that took me a while to come up with a hypothesis for. I think maybe by now it's a theory, but we'll see, is that there's more of it. Meaning if all I would have to do to try to predict whether or not my software developers, in this particular case, or knowledge workers were more productive, they actually had more square footage per person. It's a curious thing, right? And it took me a while to figure that out. And I'm, again, my thinking behind it is we now know that in order to be successful in knowledge work, you need two different kinds of spaces. You need spaces to come together for the communication, collaboration, and feedback, and that human engagement, right? Working on a team and that human engagement is very, very nice. It's good. But we also need time, sometimes quieter time, sometimes alone or in small groups where we can concentrate on the work. Those are two different types of spaces. Don't just throw everybody in one big space and call it open space and declare victory, because we're seeing that doesn't matter. But don't have a bunch of private offices like we used to have in the bad old days where nobody communicates because they're all just going behind the closed door and and doing God knows what, you know, they're not communicating. So you need both. If your workplace was quieter, you had fewer defects. Makes sense. If you can concentrate on your work, it's going to be better. I mean, that's almost duh, you know. Then there's some statistics on quiet workplaces. So really important stuff here. And most people, again, people in leadership or people in knowledge-based organizations, I finally post. I get frustrated sometimes. I posted, yeah, I think, you know, given unlimited authority, which will never happen. I get that. Within any software development organization, I believe I could double their net profit in 2 years. Why? Because I know things like this. When it comes to a decision on what space to have and what space to use and how to configure it and all these other things, I've got an opinion on it because I've read the science. And science tells me if I create a good environment, I'm going, you know, if I create a 10x environment, I'm going to maybe get some 10x productivity. Guess what happens when you take a 10x person and put them in a 1x environment? Right? What do you think happens? This is why, because of all these differences between knowledge-based complex world and how we normally manage are the reasons why, if I had the authority to make decisions, right, you know, complete and utter authority, maybe that's all I want. I'm just power hungry. But I think if I had that, I think I would make slightly better decisions. And in the complex world, when you make slightly better decisions, you can get huge returns. Just like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger making slightly better decisions in finance. The next group is right people. That's the next section. They talk about this thing called entropy. There's some folks who are probably familiar with a gentleman named Jürgen Appello. He wrote Organization 2.0 or something like that. And then he has a new book where he talks about how organizations have a life cycle. It's a really interesting argument. And it came along, it really resonated with me because I was having some of the same thoughts, and he just took it and put it, you know, in a book before I got to it. So basically, it's just like a human being. A human being has, you know, you're a newborn, you can't take care of yourself, you're very fragile, you know, bad things can happen. And then you kind of work your way up through, you know, toddler, and you're starting to be successful in the world. And then you're, you know, a kind of gangly adolescent. That's like, you know, like Series C or something. You've made it this far. But eventually, the larger organizations, they get kind of old and stodgy. And they refer to it in this book as entropy. And this entropy that settles on most large organizations really, really causes some problems in order of being effective in the world. Uniformity of attitude, appearance, and thought, you know, groupthink, lack of diversity, lack of mental models, etc. They call it the second thermodynamic law of management. Entropy is always increasing. That's why elderly institutions are tighter and a lot less fun. Maybe some of us have experienced that. I know in one instance, I worked at a place where a company had taken over a startup, and it still had that startup vibe. And for some reason, a startup usually, you know, has a lot of bottles of alcohol laying around. I don't know. They have a lot of parties and things. This is in the Bay Area. I don't know about you, right? New company comes in, takes over, and says, "Hey, you can't, no more." That was the thing, you know, edict, no more alcohol at your desks or whatever. I don't know. They tend to be less fun. Why? I don't know. Because they want uniformity. They want sameness. They want to treat everybody the same. Why do people stay at companies? Back then, they said people stay at companies because they're expected to stay, meaning that they're invested in, that people are actually looking for it. Do we do that now? No, I was laid off in June. I was perfectly reasonable human being. I could have done something else. They didn't even lift a finger to do it. They just said, "Here's your walking papers." How many of us have experienced that? How loyal are we going to be to that company? Not very. So when companies complain, "I can't get good people," I wonder why. Right? I can't get good people. Wonder why. What are you doing to get them? Are you investing in people? Right? No, we're not. We got massages on Thursday, though. Pretty cool. They're expected to stay. They're invested in. Turnover for even the best companies in the San Francisco Bay Area, I say this all the time for software developers, is 2 years. 2 years. If it's the best company, you should stay there 20 years. I don't think they're the best companies. I work for some of them. They're not really the best companies as far as I was concerned. But the ones that have low turnover, why? Because they do widespread retraining. They don't treat you like a resource. They treat you like a person who has potential, and they say, hey, wait, this job's going away, but we can train them to do something else. They're not a widget, right? Accountants, oh boy, financial incentives. What do we treat? We treat salaries as an expense. If you're creating a software product, it's not an expense, it's an investment. If you invest it wisely, you're going to get great return on it. You invest it in junk stock, you get what you pay for, right? It's a capital investment. And your training is a capital investment. It's not an expense. That's their point. They have a good section on growing productive teams. They call them gelled teams. You notice how I have the pictures match the content. So it's hard to find gelled, so I just chose Jello. I think we've all been on a gelled team before. That's the good thing. If you've been around a while, you've had some, pretty god-awful experiences, but you've also had some good experiences. And I think we've all worked on a gelled team, and they talk about that. What is it about this team that's different, that we're excited about? We enjoy what we do. We're engaged in our work. We're one of those 3 people in the United States who's actually engaged in what we do. It's because the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And the enjoyment we get is greater than you'd expect from the nature of the work. The nature of the work doesn't even have to be that good. Sometimes it's some of the worst work that helps us bond together as a team. It's the challenge, right? It's not the ease. This is the other thing about teams. And Richard Hackman, I believe, is the person who wrote a book on teams. He was a student of organizations at Harvard, I believe. So you can look that up, Hackman. It's not that we get along that counts. I mean, it helps if we get along, but some of the best teams and the highest performing teams don't always get along because it has to be challenging. Again, not meant to be easy. It's meant to be worth it. Is it worth me coming in and investing my time? These people don't need to be managed in a traditional sense. People who are on a gelled team, people who are engaged in their work, they don't need to be managed. They certainly don't need to be motivated because, as we will see in Dan Pink's, they're intrinsically motivated. There's a sense of eliteness. And this is a hack. You know how we have life hacks or whatever? Here's a Scrum Master hack that I use all the time. Don't tell my teams. You can tell. I tell them as well. I'm just kidding. I say, look, we're going to be leaders within this organization. We're going to do something different. And then once we do something different, if we're successful, we're going to lead the organization. We're going to teach the organization something they have not done before. And how motivating do you think that is? Right? There's a sense, I want my team to feel special. I want them to feel elite. And as a Scrum Master, I can help do that. Right? I have the picture. I have a Top Gun. So I was telling the story. I had a friend of mine. His name's Barry Hackett. So if you run across him, tell him I said hi. He went into the Top Gun program. And he was a naval aviator down in Pensacola, Florida, during the first Iraq War. And you want to talk about cocky, man. When he came back from flight school, he was about the cockiest person you ever had. And it's faintly annoying to people who aren't part of that group. We're special. We're different, right? We're elite. And it is annoying. It wasn't just slightly annoying. It was very annoying, at least in Barry's case. They feel like they own what they do. That's big. I tell the story about William Creech, who was the general who was in charge of the maintenance of the aircraft. And they had a terrible record. And so Bill went out. I call him Bill. Bill goes out and he talks to his people. He says, "Hey, what's going on?" And there was somebody on the front line. He says, "What's the problem?" He says, "Well, no one washes a rental car." What do you mean? You don't own a rental car. You're not going to take care of it. You're going to beat the crap out of it and you're going to give it back to somebody. And that's the way they treated the maintenance of the planes. So what Creech said is, hey, we need to own this. And they started actually painting their names on the side of the planes, and they put teams that were in charge of it. And guess what happened when they owned it instead of rented it? We need to give ownership to people. This is all over. If you look at all the stuff we're talking about today, look at the Agile Manifesto. It's all over there, right? Build projects around motivated teams. Give them what they need to succeed. It talks about excellence and how we create excellence in our products. We want people, right? Participants are pleased to have their name as part of that thing. We want our name on that side of that plane, and we're also eager for peer review. There's somebody in particular who's on training right now who knows this about me and my teams. We want you to come visit us. We want you to see what we're doing, right? That feels pretty cool when you want that. Final sign is enjoyment. It just feels right. You know, all these, it feels like family. They always say it feels like we're one big family. That's what it kind of feels like, right? And in families, we don't always agree on everything and whatever, but we say it. We have that psychological safety. There's no more psychological safety than a family, right? Because I can't even think of the word this morning. You have, that love that is you just have it, right? You don't have to question it. I say that there's a, certain, they talk about code smells. You can look at code and pretty quickly know whether it's good or bad. I can usually go into a team and I can tell you within about 10 minutes whether it's good or bad Scrum team, whether or not they've reached this level, and it's laughter. That's the key. Here's another hack. You want them to bond together as a Scrum Master, make it fun. Tell jokes, elicit laughter, because people who laugh together bond together. Think about it. How do we grow these productive teams? In most organizations, managers, and I wouldn't even use managers, leaders should spend a lot of time to creating this environment where we have this built into the environment, this healthy environment. How do we create it? They've got a number of things. One, make a cult of quality. Knowledge workers want to do the right thing. They want to have their name associated with a quality product. Anytime we cut corners and create technical debt, they die a little inside. I think we all believe that. How do we make a cult of quality? That we care so much about what we're doing that we're proud to talk about what we do. We're proud to show what we've done. Provide lots of satisfying closure. Now think about this in terms of Agile and Scrum. Cult of quality, we talked about that. How do you build quality in? You do BDD, you do automated testing. There are mechanisms to do this, to build this cult of quality. How do you provide satisfying closure? We break things down into smaller pieces and finish them, right? You don't have closure. What happens when you're working on a project for 6 months or whatever it is, and then, nothing happens? That's not motivating. That doesn't bond us together. Build that sense of eliteness. Keep telling your people, hey, we're going to be leaders. We're going to do something different. We're going to do something special. We're going to do something better. We're going to show the rest of the organization how to do that. Allow and encourage heterogeneity. This is the argument for diversity of mental models. We started this class out talking about mental models, different lenses, how we view the world. Build that and build the environment where that's encouraged. Preserve and protect successful teams. Here's the funny thing about management. I probably told this story before. If you have a team of 5 people that's doing really, really well, right? Especially if it's a pilot team, what will management do? Not leadership, management. You know what they're going to do? They're going to think, oh, we can create 5 good teams now because we're going to take these 5 people, we're going to put them on 5 different teams, and they're going to be the seeds for the new teams. As if that's how it works. Doesn't work that way. If you've got a high-performing team, if you've got a 10x team, why in God's name would you split it up? It's just ridiculous, right? Doesn't make sense at all. Keep them together, protect them. What does the Scrum Master do? Servant leader, protect the team as much as you can. And then lastly, you want to provide strategic but not tactical direction. The military knows this. That's what the military does. So here's our objective for today. You go kind of go figure it out. A lot of places in the military, they're more agile than we are in the business world. They'll surprise you. There's a quote, I forget which general, he says, give them strategic decision-making and they'll surprise you with how they solve the problem. Pleasantly, not negatively. We need to do that. You do these things, you're gonna build better teams. What do these things lead into? Look at Google's Project Aristotle. Look at the science. These guys pretty much nailed it. These things build psychological safety. They give us boundaries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you need a culture where these things can happen. When we talk about systems thinking, they refer to systems thinking here. They call it a non-deterministic system. What do they mean by non-deterministic system? Basically, what they're saying is complex. They didn't have that word. The Cynefin was not yet a thing. Complexity science was still relatively new. They called them non-deterministic systems, but these are complex systems. They said, look, the thing about non-deterministic systems is they can heal themselves painlessly and elegantly if the people who make up that system understand the goals of the system. They understand the bigger picture. They understand the why. That's why we started this class with why. If I know why, I'll do it. I'll figure my way out of it because it's a complex system. I can never know where it's headed. There's not one right answer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Give me goals. Give me overall direction. I'll figure it out. But most management, they try to create deterministic systems. What does that mean? There's a rule for everything. And this is really problematic in the complex world because in the complex world, you're going to come across things all the time that don't follow the mental models of the deterministic world. And what are you going to do? The worst thing you could. Absolutely nothing. You're going to sit there and you're going to wait until somebody tells you what to do. That is a crappy way to build a system, even in a complicated world, let alone a complex world, right? Ultimate management sin, wasting people's time. I say this frequently, I said, especially if I'm in something that does, thank you for your time, right? That's a good thing to say. Thank you for your time. I know you're busy. Thank you for your time. I hope I didn't waste it. I hope that what we did here today was something that was worthwhile. It shouldn't be a problem, but the problem with management is they have certain incentives that were built into the system through this hierarchical relationship and this misnomer of how the complex world works. And so they got to serve those masters. But those things that they do to serve the master doesn't always jive with what it takes for the people who are doing the work to be able to do the work. So what do? I interrupt them all the time. Right? And that's the worst thing you can do, waste people's time. And then the last section, which is a very small section. It's supposed to be fun to work here. And I always joke about this one because the picture I got is a kid in a business chair. Because when I did a Google search for royalty-free images that had fun and work, not a lot came up. Strange that happens. Here's the quote. Somewhere deep in our ancestral memory is buried the notion that work is supposed to be onerous. If you enjoy doing it, it's probably not work. If you enjoy it enough, it's probably sinful. We have the Puritans in this country, we have the Puritans to thank for that one. You shouldn't do it. It's not work. You certainly shouldn't be paid for having a good time. What you ought to do is find something that feels like work, right? And then you can be bored, tired, and generally miserable like everybody else. There's a reason why I started out, talked a little bit about why, and there's a reason why I talked about the engagement of people. If you can start to understand how the complex world is different, how the knowledge-based world is different, and how you can lead in it, forget this management stuff. Management's for the complicated world. When you lead in the complex world and you understand the complex world, you're going to create better teams. You're going to create a better world for the people doing the work. You're going to create better products. You're going to create engagement. That's why we do this stuff. That's why you're here today, I hope. I've got a little animation about Drive. So if you haven't read the book, you should, but the animation is great. Some of you have seen it before.
Our motivations are unbelievably interesting. I mean, I find I've been working on this for a few years, and I just find the topic still so amazingly engaging and interesting. So I want to tell you about that. The science is really surprising. The science is a little bit freaky, okay? We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think. There's a whole set of unbelievably interesting studies. I want to give you two that call into question this idea that if you reward something, you get more of the behavior you want. If you punish something, you get less of it. So let's go from London to the mean streets of Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the northeastern part of the United States. And let's talk about a study done at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Here's what they did. They took a whole group of students, and they gave them a set of challenges. Things like memorizing strings of digits, solving word puzzles, other kinds of spatial puzzles, even physical tasks like throwing a ball through a hoop. Okay, they gave them these challenges, and they said to incentivize their performance, they gave them 3 levels of rewards. Okay, so if you did pretty well, you got a small monetary reward. If you did medium well, you got a medium monetary reward. And if you did really well, if you were one of the top performers, you got a large cash prize. Okay? We've seen this movie before. This is essentially a typical motivation scheme within organizations, right? We reward the very top performers, we ignore the low performers, and the other folks kind of in the middle. Okay, you get a little bit. So what happens? They do the test, they have these incentives. Here's what they found out. 1, as long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better their performance. Okay, that makes sense. But here's what happens. But once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward led to poorer performance. Now this is strange, right? A larger reward led to poorer performance? How can that possibly be? Now what's interesting about this is that these folks here who did this are all economists, 2 at MIT, 1 at the University of Chicago, 1 at Carnegie Mellon, okay, the top tier of the economics profession. And they're reaching this conclusion that seems contrary to what a lot of us learned in economics, which is that the higher the reward, the better their performance. And they're saying that once you get above rudimentary cognitive skill, it's the other way around. Which seems like this kind of, the idea that these rewards don't work that way seems vaguely left-wing and socialist, doesn't it? It's kind of this kind of weird socialist conspiracy. For those of you who have those conspiracy theories, I want to point out the notoriously left-wing socialist group that financed the research, the Federal Reserve Bank. So this is the mainstream of the mainstream coming to a conclusion that's quite surprising. Seems to defy the laws of behavioral physics. So this is strange, a strange finding. So what do? They say, this is freaky. Let's go test it somewhere else. Maybe that $50 or $60 prize isn't sufficiently motivating for an MIT student, right? So let's go to a place where $50 is actually more significant relatively. Right? So let's take the experiment. We're going to go to Madurai, India, rural India, where $50, $60, whatever the number was, is actually a significant sum of money. So they replicated the experiment in India roughly as follows. Small rewards, the equivalent of 2 weeks' salary. Small performance, low performance, 2 weeks' salary. Medium performance, about a month's salary. High performance, about 2 months' salary. Okay, so those are real good incentives. Okay, so you're going to get a different result here. Well, what happened, though, was that the people offered the medium reward did no better than the people offered the small reward. But this time around, the people offered the top reward. They did worst of all. Higher incentives led to worse performance. What's interesting about this is that it actually isn't all that anomalous. This has been replicated over and over and over again by psychologists, by some extent by sociologists, and by economists, over and over and over again. For simple, straightforward tasks, those kinds of incentives, if you do this, then you get that, they're great. For tasks that are algorithmic, set of rules where you have to just follow along and get a right answer, if-then rewards, carrots and sticks, outstanding. But when the task gets more complicated, when it requires some conceptual creative thinking, those kinds of motivators demonstrably don't work. Fact, money is a motivator at work, but in a slightly strange way. If you don't pay people enough, they won't be motivated. What's curious about, there's another paradox here, which is that the best use of money as a motivator is to pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table. Pay people enough so that they're not thinking about money and they're thinking about the work. Now, once you do that, it turns out there are three factors that the science shows lead to better performance, not to mention personal satisfaction. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy is our desire to be self-directed, to direct our own lives. Now, in many ways, traditional notions of management run afoul of that. Management is great if you want compliance, but if you want engagement, which is what we want in the workforce today as people are doing more complicated, sophisticated things, self-direction is better. Let me give you some examples of this, of almost radical forms of self-direction in the workplace that lead to good results. Let's start with this company right here, Atlassian, an Australian company. It's a software company, and they do something really cool. Once a quarter on a Thursday afternoon, they say to their developers, for the next 24 hours, you can work on anything you want. You can work on it the way you want. You can work on it with whomever you want. All we ask is that you show the results to the company at the end of those 24 hours in this fun kind of meeting, not a star chamber session, but this fun meeting with beer and cake and fun and other things like that. It turns out that that one day of pure, undiluted autonomy has led to a whole array of fixes for existing software, a whole array of ideas for new products that otherwise had never emerged. One day. Now, this is not an if-then incentive. This is not the sort of thing that I would have done 3 years ago before I knew this research. I would have said, you want people to be creative and innovative? Give them a freaking innovation bonus. If you can do something cool, I'll give you $2,500. They're not doing this at all. They're essentially saying, you probably want to do something interesting. Let me just get out of your way. One day of autonomy produces things that had never emerged. Right, let's talk about mastery. Mastery is our urge to get better at stuff. We like to get better at stuff. This is why people play musical instruments on the weekend. You got all these people who are acting in ways that seem irrational economically. They play musical instruments on weekends. Why? It's not going to get them a mate. It's not going to make them any money. Why are they doing it? Because it's fun, because you get better at it, and that's satisfying. Go back in time a little bit. I imagine this if I went to my first economics professor, a woman named Mary Alice Schulman, and I went to her in 1983 and said, Professor Schulman, can I talk to you after class for a moment? Yeah. I got this inkling. I got this idea for a business model. I just want to run it past you. Here's how it would work. You get a bunch of people around the world who are doing highly skilled work, but they're willing to do it for free and volunteer their time, 20, sometimes 30 hours a week. Okay, she's looking at you somewhat skeptically there. Oh, but I'm not done. And then what they create, they give it away rather than sell it. It's going to be huge. I mean, she truly would have thought I was insane. Okay, it seemed to fly in the face of so many things. But what do you have? You have Linux powering 1 out of 4 corporate servers in Fortune 500 companies, Apache powering more than the majority of web servers, Wikipedia. What's going on? Why are people doing this? Why are these people, many of whom are technically sophisticated, highly skilled people who have jobs? Okay, they have jobs. They're working at jobs for pay, doing sophisticated technological work. And yet, during their limited discretionary time, they do equally, if not more, technically sophisticated work, not for their employer, but for someone else for free. That's a strange economic behavior. Economists who look into it, why are they doing this? It's overwhelmingly clear. Challenge and mastery, along with making a contribution. That's it. What you see more and more is a rise of what you might call the purpose motive, is that more and more organizations want to have some kind of transcendent purpose, partly because it makes coming to work better, partly because that's the way to get better talent. And what we're seeing now is, in some ways, when the profit motive becomes unmoored from the purpose motive, bad things happen. Bad things ethically sometimes, but also bad things just like not good stuff, like crappy products, like lame services, like uninspiring places to work. That when the profit motive is paramount, or when it becomes completely unhitched from the purpose motive, it's just, people don't do great things. More and more organizations are realizing this and sort of disturbing the categories between what's profit and what's purpose. And I think that actually heralds something interesting. And I think that the organizations that are flourishing, whether they're profit, for profit, or somewhere in between, are animated by this purpose mode. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here's the founder of Skype. He says, our goal is to be disruptive, but in the cause of making the world a better place. Pretty good purpose. Here's Steve Jobs. I want to put a ding in the universe. All right? That's the kind of thing that might get you up in the morning and racing to go to work. So I think that, that we are purpose maximizers, not only profit maximizers. I think the science shows that we care about mastery very, very deeply. And the science shows that we want to be self-directed. And I think that the big takeaway here is that if we start treating people like people and not assuming that they're simply horses, slower, smaller, better-smelling horses, if we get past this kind of ideology of carrots and sticks and look at the science, I think we can actually build organizations and work lives that make us better off, but I also think they have the promise to make our world just a little bit better.
Interesting stuff. Sorry, I got to turn my microphone back on. Not what we were taught, probably, right? A little different. One of the things that I'm often asked is, why do you do what you do? And why do the volunteers and the moderators and the people who are part of the job hackers community who volunteer their time, why do they do it? I think that it makes a little more sense after you see this and read the book.